Immigrant ship Surat, a 10-year-old iron 3-masted sailing vessel. Weight 1,000 tons. Crew 37. Passengers 270 immigrants from the United Kingdom, including the Channel Islands and Europe. 45 single men, a number of single women, and numerous young married couples, many with young families. Cargo, railway iron, heavy machinery and general cargo, valued at about £8,000, and more importantly, the dreams and worldly possessions of 270 immigrants. Many of these passengers were skilled craftsmen whose skills were urgently required to help build a new and prosperous country. Ploughmen, spinners, stonemasons, carpenters and weavers. On board the Surat, spirits were high. The immigrants were celebrating the last day of 1873 and the last day of their 3-month trip. The next day, the first day of January 1874, they would be going ashore in Dunedin to begin their new lives in New Zealand. The Surat had had an uneventful journey, but that was soon to change. They had sighted Stewart Island in the afternoon of the 31st of December. Soon the captain altered course and set sail up the rugged South Otago coast, bound for Dunedin. There was much excitement amongst the passengers and crew. For almost everyone, including Captain Edmund Joseph Johnson, the officers and crew, this was their first sighting of New Zealand. At 9:20 on New Year's Eve, Captain Johnson set a course for Port Chalmers and retired to his cabin, leaving the ship under the command of second mate Edward Hasselton. 30 minutes later, the lookout, Seaman Larson, called, "Land off the port bow." Hasselton made no change to direction for 5 minutes and did nothing. As the weather cleared, Hasselton noticed that the land was much nearer than he'd anticipated. He called the command to alter course, but it was too late. The Surat struck the rocky seabed. She grated as if she was going over a gravel bank. It was 10 to 10 on New Year's Eve, just off Catlins Mistake. Passengers recall they felt the Surat suffering 5 distinct jolts as she drove over the rocky seabed. Captain Johnson resumed command and ordered the crew to reduce sail and trim the yards. Passengers were requested to man the pumps. Those on board who were celebrating the new year were suddenly very anxious about the state of the Surat. Captain Johnson assured them there was no cause for alarm and continued to sail the Surat away from the land. However, within an hour, water had found its way into the bilge. A marathon of manual pumping began as passengers and crew operated the only working pump. Even the women were called in to take their turn. Gin flowed freely for those operating the pumps, but sadly not as freely as the incoming ocean. Many of the passengers became concerned as the excessive alcohol took hold of the crew and officers. On board the Surat were William and Mary Morris and their 12-month-old son William from Ireland. The ordeal of their shipwreck and settlement had a profound effect on them. Mary wrote this letter just a week after arriving in Dunedin.
Dear Mother, Father and Sisters, I dare say by this time you've heard of the wreck of the Surat, but thank God no lives were lost. I will give you a full account of it. On New Year's Eve we were all saying what a prosperous voyage we had had, and were all going to bed, when suddenly we heard a dreadful crash. We had struck a rock. We all rushed up on deck, some naked and others half-dressed with babies in arms, but the captain told us not to be alarmed, as there was not much damage done.
Between 3 and 5 a.m, the passenger vessel Wanganui sailed within sight of the Surat. But Captain Johnson made no attempt to signal her, despite more than a metre of water in the holds. Again, passengers believed he'd had too much to drink. Despite pleas from his own officers, he refused to raise the alarm, stating that he was in command and would land them in Dunedin and nowhere else. Captain Johnson threatened to shoot anyone who raised a signal or fired a gun without his orders. Confusion and ill discipline between the captain, officers, crew and passengers continued to plague the sinking vessel. Lifeboats were set adrift, fueling rumours that the captain was planning to scuttle the ship and save himself and his officers in the only remaining lifeboat, abandoning the passengers and crew to a watery grave.
Oh, what a dreadful night that was! Your dream was fully realised and no hope of saving ourselves. Dear mother, I gave up for lost, and with Willie in my arms was standing on deck praying for all of you and awaiting the last moment. It was a heart-rending sight and one never to be forgotten. The captain and officers were all drunk and tried all in their power to steer out in open sea and sink us all and save themselves. The sailors were not in agreement and stood by us to a man, and if it had not been for them, we all should have been lost.
Mary Morris's husband William was an experienced seaman. He eventually took the helm and with the help of the mutinous crew ran the Surat aground at Jack's Bay. 100 passengers, mainly women and children, were put ashore.
We were left on the seashore while the boats returned for the men. We were all standing on the seashore waiting and wishing for our husbands. We saved nothing but ourselves.
The Surat began dragging anchor. It cleared the headlands by the narrowest of margins and came to rest in what is now called Surat Bay. This was the final resting place for the Surat, the soft sand providing a lethal grip on the doomed ship. As luck would have it, the conditions were favourable, enabling the remaining 170 passengers and crew to get ashore without incident. It was now late morning, just over 12 hours since the Surat first ran aground. Surat Bay is at the mouth of the Catlins River. The area was heavily forested and was home to a handful of sawmillers and their families. The survivors received generous hospitality and, to the sacrifice of the locals, afforded accommodation, food and clothing. On the 3rd of January, the French man of war, the Vire, the Wanganui and the smaller Wallaby rescued the survivors and transported them to Port Chalmers near Dunedin. There they received food, fresh fruit and hospitality. Later that day they were transported the remaining few kilometres to Dunedin and to their accommodation at the immigration barracks. On the 8th of January 1874, just over a week after running aground, an inquiry opened into the loss of the Surat. On the 20th, the packed courthouse heard the inquiry's judgment. Captain Johnson was held responsible for the Surat not being in a seaworthy condition because of a lack of detailed charts for New Zealand and for not determining his correct position once sighting land and not consulting the New Zealand pilot, which he had on board. The New Zealand pilot was a maritime Bible containing vital information about navigational hazards as well as tidal and current information. The captain and officers were found guilty of not making an effort to lessen the leak, for not raising the alarm for the Wanganui to begin a rescue, for insobriety, therefore being unfit for duties, and for not retrieving the passengers' effects. The captain and the officers were stripped of their certificates of competency. Worse was to follow for Captain Johnson. The passengers brought civil proceedings against the captain. He was found guilty of being reckless, drunk, and behaving improperly. He was jailed for 2 months. The Surat was auctioned on January the 5th for £7,050. This included all the cargo and the passengers' belongings. It was devastating for the passengers, as many were travelling with the tools of their trade, in effect removing any opportunities to earn a living. Eventually, some were able to open a few of their boxes retrieved from the Surat, only to find those employed to retrieve them had stolen anything of any worth. In the true spirit of early settlers, most remained in the Otago region and became prominent and worthy citizens. Their heritage and descendants still playing a major part in the province today.
Dear mother, I'm in such a state of excitement that I hardly know what I am writing. It's such a beautiful country. The birds are lovely and the flowers too. There's plenty of food and all. We had such a beautiful voyage and we're looking forward to land in a few days. when the accident occurred. Goodbye to you, and do not forget me. I am crying while I write. God bless you and preserve you all, is the earnest prayer of your loving daughter and sister, Mary Morris.
Only a few remnants of the wreck survive today, lovingly preserved in Owaka, the surrounding districts, and Dunedin.